Thank you so much, Johannes. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we are about to begin.
Mesdames et messieurs, nous allons commencer. Nous avons des personnes qui nous rejoignent en ce moment même. Dans juste quelques instants, nous allons souhaiter la bienvenue à tout le monde et commencer les discussions.
So, I think we are ready to begin. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear friends from around the world, GCAP members and partners. We are here to welcome you in a GCAP discussion about COP27. We have a wonderful panel of GCAP members and partners from around the world that joined the negotiations and the proceedings in Egypt, that, as you know, ended this Sunday with an outcome that is still discussed. And this is why we are also here to share our insight, to talk about our experiences, and so also to comment about the outcomes of this, as it was called, Africa COP, where finally the discussion of climate justice was at the forefront. Let me introduce myself. My name is Constantinos. I'm part of the governance structure of a Greek civil society organization called Organization Earth. And through this work, I serve as the president of the Hellenic Platform for Development, which means I represent European civil society coalitions at the Global Council of GCAP. The Global Call to Action Against Poverty, GCAP, supports people in the struggle for justice and brings individuals and organizations together to challenge the institutions and the processes that perpetuate poverty and inequalities. Together, we defend and promote human rights, gender justice, social justice, and of course, as the subject of today, climate justice and the security needed for the dignity and peace of all. We were at the COP27 to defend human rights and to make sure that the desperately needed green transition is also going to be a just transition. Let me start by thanking all the team of GCAP, the Secretariat, Johannes, Ingo, who I'm also, on behalf of his, welcome you here today. Let me also give you a few house rules. We're going to be recording today's sessions in order to be shared with other partners and colleagues later on. I ask everyone to keep their mic off, if possible, when they're not speaking. And we're going to ask our panelists to give a brief introduction about the experiences and opinions about this year's COP. And after that, we're going to continue with a discussion with the audience as well. You can also use the chat to post your comments and questions, and we, with the help of the team of GCAP, we're gonna try to answer them all. And let me also tell you that we today have simultaneous translation in 3 languages. So besides English, where we're going to be speaking today, in the beginning, we're also going to have translation simultaneously in Spanish, Portuguese, and French. So you can look at the on the bottom side of your screen, and you're going to see where it has interpretation, and you can choose which language you're going to be using today. So I'm not going to use the intro to talk about my experience in COP, as I was there with the esteemed colleagues and I had the pleasure to meet and work with some of them. I'm going to go directly to our speakers, and hopefully I'm going to have the chance to also comment a bit later. So we're going to be starting, we're going to change a bit the schedule as we have some colleagues that are trying to connect now. And we're going to start with my colleague, José Luis Monteiro, from the Portuguese Non-Governmental Developmental Organization and GCAP Portugal. He's a biologist and activist, and he has voluntarily been involved in the work of several Portuguese non-governmental organizations for more than 3 decades and professionally for more than 20 years. He currently works at ECOS, where he divides his time between developing global citizen education projects in Portugal and working on environmental issues and sustainable development in developing countries. Jose, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for being here with us. I ask you to begin with an initial statement of about 5 minutes, so you can set the scene and tell us more about COP27, its outcomes, and also about your experience there. Welcome to everyone, and welcome, Constantinos.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to share my experience and my point of view of COP27. What I can tell you, I've been participating in several of these meetings since Paris, since 2015. What I can tell you is there's been a considerable degradation of what COP means and of how COP works and functions through all these years. Paris was a moment of joy and of hope for what could be in the future, and what we have now is an event in which there is a much bigger presence of corporate institutions and of corporate interests, and much less presence of the civil society, and it's not so straightforward what everybody is doing there and why everybody is there. What I could feel is that there is a growing distance between what people want and what people need, and what happens in these COPs, in these meetings. Nonetheless, it is the biggest opportunity we have each year to influence the global agenda for climate. So it's really important that we can participate. So I think it's not innocent that this COP was held in Egypt, and we were not allowed to speak on several subjects. Like we couldn't speak about democracy, we couldn't speak clearly about human rights. Each time you had a couple of activists together, you have someone with a very suspicious look near you, listening to what was being said, and there was like a kind of surveillance over a lot of what the civil society wanted to bring to this COP. So from the beginning, that was the first feeling, and then there was the results and the access that we have to governmental officials and to negotiators. We have less access this time around, but I think since Madrid, things have been going in that direction in terms of more time for corporate and for sponsors, and less time for civil society. And the results are a mixed bag, or a bag of almost nothing, because you have for the first time, you have a decision to establish a fund for loss and damage, which is something that has been in the works since Vanuatu first presented the idea in 1991, before there was even one COP. So in 1991, I was starting, it was my first year of university, and now my oldest son is getting out of university. So it took 31 years to have something. And it's just something. It's not what we want or what we need, because what we have is the establishment of a new fund that will be constituted in the next years, and we don't know who will put money into it, who will benefit from it, how it will be managed. So it's still something. It's a beginning, but it's not the end. And the other big result, and I think the big battle that was held in COP, was about ambition and about the 1.5 versus 2 degrees Celsius. And what we saw is that there is a growing will to forget about the 1.5 degrees and just say that that Paris was all about 2 degrees and not about about 1.5. This time around, at least, the 1.5 ambition was kept, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done to achieve 1.5. I would like to remember that we are en route for 2.8 degrees by the end of the century, and no new commitments were made to mitigate more in this COP. So it was kind of a wasted opportunity, and a small victory for a long battle that's still to come.
Thank you, Jose. It's absolutely incredible what you mentioned about your child. Actually, so it's a whole generation that is trying to make these changes happen. So it's a lot of people have come out of this COP disappointed, as you say, because maybe it's too little too late. I'm also gonna welcome in the discussion Caroline Robusa Usikpedo. Are you here with us? Caroline is the Executive Director of the Noble Delta Women for Peace and Development, formerly known as Niger Delta Women's Movement for Peace and Development. Caroline and her organization has been committed to reducing extreme poverty by fighting climate change and environmental pollution, which is a root cause of poverty and conflict in the Niger Delta, and empower women and rights to reduce the vulnerability. Caroline, welcome to the discussion. Where are you connecting? Are you back in Nigeria? And I wanted to ask you if you can also explain to us what gender equality played as a role in this year's COP, when we also heard from Jose that unfortunately it seems that we don't get into discussions the people that needed to be there. But however, I would like to hear your take on this. Welcome, Caroline, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone from anywhere you are from the part of the world. I'm calling from Nigeria. I've returned back to Nigeria from Sharm el-Sheikh. And first of all, I want to say that my hopes for COP27 weren't actually met, because we thought that a lot could be done from what they did in the last minute. And for the feminist organizations, we'll try to push for gender equality, because gender equality means a lot within the climate change circle. And without gender equality, there can be no true climate justice. And the discussions in this COP really didn't center so much on gender equality, even though there was a lot of push. So for me, addressing the issue of loss and damage in this COP27 was a historic moment, although it came at a later stage, because I come from Nigeria, especially in the Niger Delta, where we were faced with massive flooding as a result of climate change. I left that situation and I went to COP27, thinking that Africa will be able to address the issue of climate disaster, keeping onto the agreement of limiting to 1.5. But issues of fossil fuel was not even properly addressed within this within the COP. So where are we really going from here? Is it just going to COP to gather and then discuss, and then they come out and say, okay, this is what we have put on the ground without any actions? So this is a question that I have not been able to answer by myself, and I'm still looking for answer to it. So there is still much that needs to be resolved to keep the agenda, rather than putting down coal by the countries that are polluting the environment. So for us in Nigeria, we think that there is still a lot to be done when it even comes to issues of demands. What do we need from our leaders? How do we keep to the targets? Now they said it's a implementation plan that is the result from COP. This implementation plan, what are the roadmaps for implementation? Was it really discussed? or in another 12 months, we will gather in Dubai, then we begin to talk about implementation. Where is the link between the Paris Agreement and then the Glasgow Pact? Do we just discuss and leave all these things on papers? Or we are trying to link them together to see how people can move from where they are to limit to keep up to 1.5 that all of us are fighting for. So also there was also a compromise outcome that the delivery of climate change action should begin from our homes. But who are those that will lead this process? Is it the politicians, or is it the big shots that are driving the fossil fuel industries? There is no clear plan as to this. All these were not even taken into consideration within the COP. So to me, while we are celebrating the setting up of the loss and damage fund, COP27 did not deliver. That is my own reflection. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Deep reflections there, issues that we need to all think about. I think at this point, it makes no sense to deny the relation, I can say, of the fact that we knew that in Egypt, we had the biggest delegation of fossil fuel lobbyists than ever before. And at the final text, we saw a lot of watering down about what it means to phase down or phase out of fossil fuels. But I'm going to take some of your questions and ask my friend and colleague, Kenneth. Kenneth Nana Amoentag, the Executive Director of the Abibinos Roma Foundation and GCAP Ghana Coordinator, a policy advisor in development within local community who focuses sustainable development related issues. Kenneth is involved in capacity and policy support provided to civil society organizations while working really closely with policymakers. He's also responsible for many local SDG networks in Ghana as he works in empowerment and development, education, climate change, sustainable development, human rights, peace building, and tries to assist them with the project manager. Kenneth, I know that you were part of the negotiation of the loss and damage for many years now. That's in this COP, and I would like you to take on what Caroline was actually just explaining to us. Welcome, Kenneth. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I need to put my video off because of the internet. When I arrive, I've not had the opportunity to go out. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And just a jiffy to add what Caroline has said. We came to today's COP27 with a clear objective to demand for climate justice, loss and damage, and also finance facility to the vulnerable communities, and demand accountability from our government, who receive a lot of funding. And basically, that was our expectation. My first COP again, where world leaders promised that by the year 2000, they are going to give us 100 billion up to 2025. Coming to this COP, we knew that it's for basically implementation, and it's a done deal. So we work with our negotiators. For African, we went to Senegal to talk to the African Union, where they have the African Ministers meeting. We were calling for loss and damage from the civil society organization, because we think that this is the fourth COP in Africa, and we can't leave Africa without achieving at least loss and damage. And so, because the vulnerable people live in Africa, and Africa, we emit between 4 to 6%. And the impact is so severe in our local communities, the impact of climate change in the various communities. So basically, that was what we are calling for, and that is what we were also following our negotiators, pushing for loss and damage, at least to get finance facilities for loss and damage, and also look for adaptation facilities finance. In that course, we're also looking at our governments and how to make sure when they receive the fund, it will not be a corruption, but it will go to the communities who are suffering most. So we are looking for that justice aspect. Even as we are calling for global leaders in various countries, we find that some of the communities, because of politics and because they don't support maybe one government, if different government they want to do a project that favor them, where they will receive a lot of votes. And so for this COP, we have objective, and our objective was to have at least the loss and damage fund, and at least we receive it, we get it, even though we are not happy about it. Even though the 100 billion now, they are not saying it's spread again, they are saying that like willingness, if they want to, they want to give to us, but it's not a thing that is promised. And the strategy they use is that they make sure that we concentrate on the loss and damage, and the other aspect we forget about it, and then they are going to do the negotiation for it. That is one of the disappointments that for me, I was not happy about it, because African leaders was concentrated because of the money. They were all into loss and damage, without leaving the other aspect that we need to strive for us to get a good deal out of it. So in a nutshell, COP27, even though it's a little disappointment, we will take it as average, it's better than none, and also call for the 1.5 million, 1.5, yeah. We also want to ask that fossil fuel will be flushed out, and also call for a greater leadership for Africa. Basically, that is what I would say.
Thank you, Kenneth. I do have a question, but I think, Johannes, maybe we need your help a bit. There was a bit of a confusion with the translation. We kind of lost the English version. Is everybody back online?
If there's any trouble with the translation, please also message me in the chat and I can assist you. There should be different channels available for the interpretation. Sorry, there was just a small mistake with the interpretation. Sorry about that. It should now go smoothly. We have interpretation available, maybe just to say this once more, in French, Portuguese, and Spanish. And maybe I also can announce this briefly, que muy bienvenidos y bienvenidos a todos y todas. También tenemos interpretación disponible en español, en portugués. Ustedes pueden escoger abajito, en la bolita pequeña que dice interpretación, escoger su lengua favorita allá también. And just to announce this briefly in French also, in case we have someone who does not know the system. Encore une fois, bonjour à tous et toutes. J'aimerais bien inviter-vous d'utiliser la fonction d'interprétation qu'on a disponible. En bas, il y a une petite boule qui dit interprétation. Là, vous pouvez choisir français pour écouter toute la conversation en français aujourd'hui. Merci beaucoup, and I return to you, Constantinos.
Thank you so much, Johannes, for the announcements and for the facilitation, and also a big thanks to our translators, to the beautiful team of GCAP and the Secretariat. Kenneth, before I move forward, I wanted to ask you something. So everybody's talking about this facility, this structure, that what is the purpose? Are they just going to move everything in a discussion in Dubai? Is there going to be a lot of working that we also need to participate from now to Dubai in order to make sure that's going to become a reality? Can you share some light on how the exact next steps are for this?
So in the text that came, they said am I online? The text that came, they said they need to have 2 seminars or 2 conferences on the implementation of the secretariat. And after that, so there'll be a series of meetings before the June meeting in Germany. So basically, that is what they would. There's two meetings before Germany, which is a BOM meeting in June, and then we'll go to COP28. So basically, that is what we need to do. What I'll call for is that GCAP to position itself to look at the how the money is going to come and how developed countries are also going to use the money. If we are going to then monitor, if we are going to have a committee to just look at that aspect of it, it will be very, very important.
Thank you, Kenneth. We'll get back on this. I'm making some notes so we can have a discussion after that. At this moment, as we have more speakers and audience members coming in, I'm gonna ask Johannes if he can play a video greeting that we have from our colleague Cesar Artiga, GCAP El Salvador, a newly elected public representative of the Escazú Agreement in Latin America and the Caribbean. If we can share this video message, as Cesar could not be here with us today, and we're going to continue with our speakers right after that. Thank you so much.
Indeed, thank you, Constantinos. And please, also all English speakers, if you don't speak Spanish, you need to now select the interpretation channel English. So again, go to the bottom, select interpretation, and then English to be able to hear the translation from the video greeting that Cesar is delivering in Spanish. I'll give you one more second and then play it.
Amigos y amigas, es un placer, un gusto saludarles. Mi nombre es César Artiga, de El Salvador, de GCAP, de Latinoamérica y el Caribe, y también representante electo del público para el Acuerdo de Escazú en América Latina y el Caribe. Ahora que ha terminado la COP27, es importante decir que a pesar del resultado de haber adoptado un mecanismo de pérdidas y daños que está en proceso, que esto es muy bueno para los países del sur global que están viviendo impactos severos del cambio climático en un contexto donde estas manifestaciones se están acelerando y son cada vez más frecuentes, más intensas y causan mucho dolor y causan mucho sufrimiento a los pueblos, pero también están provocando más deterioro a la naturaleza, a los ecosistemas y a la biodiversidad. En ese contexto también les quiero decir que el Acuerdo de Escazú, que es el acuerdo regional sobre el acceso a la información, la participación pública y el acceso a la justicia en asuntos ambientales, es un instrumento sumamente valioso para activar precisamente la acción climática, una acción climática que sea efectiva, porque cualquier política pública que se adopte o cualquier compromiso internacional, convenio, acuerdo que suscriban los estados, si no se garantiza la participación ciudadana, estas políticas o estos acuerdos no van a ser efectivos, porque precisamente la participación de las personas, el involucramiento de la ciudadanía es el que puede marcar la diferencia, ¿verdad? Una participación educada, una participación intencional, que participe en todas las etapas, ámbitos y niveles de cómo se implementan estos grandes instrumentos internacionales, estas responsabilidades de los estados y también a nivel nacional las políticas. Es decir también, ¿verdad?, que lamentablemente al cierre de la COP vemos que no estamos en camino a cumplir con la meta de los 1.5 grados. Vemos que se siguen subsidiando los combustibles fósiles y que el llamado urgente, el llamado de los pueblos es a adoptar medidas contundentes, acciones contundentes con sentido de urgencia. Seguimos.
That was the video message from Cesar, who's currently in Ecuador. Over to you, Constantinos. while Constantinos is finding his connection, let me just give a little bit more detail about Cesar. As mentioned, he is the public elected representative of the Escazú Agreement, which ensures participation in decision-making in Latin America and the Caribbean on all things related to environmental matters and justice. That's a unique instrument that is new for the region and can have a huge impact for not only the region, but also a signal to the whole continent and other continents, since Latin America and the Caribbean is one of the most dangerous places for human rights and also environmental activists who are systematically prosecuted by different groups in the continent. So this new this mechanism that he mentions, the Escazú Agreement, ensures and enshrines the right, but also the duty to involve civil society in all decisions, and that also has obviously a strong impact on the whole climate justice movement, since it's a consultative process that whenever the governments want to build something or take a decision, the public must be involved in taking that decision. As I see, Constantinos is back now, also with his sound. Let us see if he's back online. For now, we cannot hear.
Sorry about this. I had to. Technical difficulties. I do apologize. I have to connect through my mobile phone. I did miss parts of Cesar's statement, but I'm going to try to catch up. He called for all of us to be activated and participate in this process. Dear Johannes, did we already introduce our next speaker?
Not yet.
All right, and sorry to everybody about this. I'm back and trying to follow up. So we have one more speaker. We have together with us Vercilene Francisco Diaz. She's a Brazilian Quilombola activist from CONAC, the National Coordination of Rural Black Quilombola Communities in Brazil. She is the co-founder of the National Network of Quilombola Lawyers and member of the Brazilian Association of Black Researchers, and was named Women of Success by Forbes Brazil in 2021. She comes from a small Quilombo, a small settlement of the Quilombola people in the Brazilian state of Goiás, and holds a master's degree in agrarian law from the Federal University of Goiás and an MBA in law from the same university. She's part of GCAP and also the Global Forum of Communities Discriminated on Work, which is the coordinated organization of GCAP Social Justice Tackles. Helene, very good to have you here. Unfortunately, I didn't have the opportunity to meet you live in Egypt, but now it's a good opportunity for us to get together online. Helene, welcome. The floor is yours.
Olá, bom dia todas e todos, né? Um prazer enorme estar aqui. Acho que são algumas questões a ser compartilhadas.
Matters here that we have to talk about, especially when it comes to the participation of CONAC here in Brazil, the representation of the Quilombolan community. We've got different experience here in the participation in different climate conferences in the previous ones, but this was one where the Quilombolan community had the highest number of participants. And we had a big participation when it came to gender equality. So most of the people present thereat were women. And so we also had some partnerships with other different organizations, but from the beginning, we've had some difficulties when it came to dialogue, when it came to some limitations in participation regarding some matters. For example, some that came up due to the fact that it's a place whereat it took place in Egypt. Some of these limitations, they made it so that we went to COP just to talk about matters, the collective, but without mentioning gender equality or addressing gender equality. And so climate justice in Quilombolan communities was talked about, but our participation was very limited to some panels next to the organization that which we represent and through which we participate, and which is the Climate and Society one. That has to do with civil society. CONAC didn't participate in Brazil. We had this problem as well due to the some of the political situations here in Brazil, and this absence of dialogue in the current status. So we produced, we elaborated, we drafted with some materials to participate, and we participated in some of the panels, but our participation was rather limited with some of the countries in Latin America, because we had some trouble as well with communicating because of language barriers. Some of the discussions, some of the conferences in Colombia, talking about some of the process pertaining to repairs. And in civil society here in Brazil, we had several different participations here, but it was rather limited. The climate issue when it came to Quilombolan communities as well. We participated, but it was an important moment for us to have a dialogue with other countries from Latin America and other countries from Africa as well. Even though there was a bit of a difficulty with the language barriers, this dialogue was rather essential for us to look forward to new strategies and new participation as well. This was my first COP event, and so I had some difficulties. We tried to participate in some of the different panels, but we had a few difficulties. We had to deal with some of the barriers, especially with some of the language barriers. So some we had simultaneous interpretation, some we didn't, and so we had to always be on the lookout to have the slightest of participation in the panel to discuss climate change in some of the communities, and that actually wound up in us having a very limited participation in some of the matters that also affect Quilombolan community, especially gender issues, fighting the climate change, and so we were very limited on that, and some of the Quilombolan, talking about some of the Quilombolan communities as well, and how they can contribute to preserve the environment and fight climate change. We talk a little bit about this, but some of the discussion with some of the countries, with other countries in Latin America, we did have a good opportunity to talk with some of them, and some of the recently elected officials in Brazil that have a more popular representative and have a better dialogue with Quilombolan communities, civil society about this change and what's happening regarding climate change. And so first week we stayed, and then that's when we mobilized. That's when we had the most representative of mobilization and the movement. That's where most of the political participation, with the coming of the elected president in Brazil. And it was very important, this mobilization, and the documents that were drafted during that week. At least there was political intent and the desire to participate in political dialogue about the Quilombolan communities, and also to preserve the environment and the territories in order to guarantee a better work when it comes to preserving the environment, and also the movement in fighting climate change that affects so much the Quilombolan communities in Brazil. And so since this was my first COP, the best result that we had was this dialogue, this contact that we had with different countries, but we did feel a lot of limitations in some of our discussions. some of them pertaining to the country at which these were discussed, the laws, and the group of youngsters we had. For some of them protesters, some of them talking about this matter. And so the participation of the youth when it came to climate change, in order to fight climate change in the planet, was also rather good. And overall, the experience, I think, was good. But we look forward to, in the next COP, we will have a better participation. And this was a rather unique experience regarding the country in which the COP took place that definitely limited us.
Yes, you are absolutely right, and I would like us to touch on that point when we start the discussion as well. I have to also admit that during the COP, a lot of interest and a lot of activation by Brazilian delegates, policymakers, activists, and of course, very much interest around the world about what we now call the return of Brazil to the discussions with the new president. But let me also ask you if you have any information about what was heard, that there's also the possibility of having a ministry for indigenous people, which is something quite important for all the work we've been doing about the inclusion of marginalized persons. Do you have any information to share with us about this? This is more about Brazil, but this, I think, it's a step important for all of us.
Sim, acho que tivemos.
Yes, I believe that we had these important matters, that we had some of the indigenous peoples taking place, and some of them with plenty of political representative during this latest election in Brazil. And along the lines of what is said, is that we were going to create an indigenous ministry, a ministry for indigenous people, apologies. And regarding the population of African-American and people of color, we have here to mobilize some of the ministries that already exist here in Brazil, and the Ministry for Racial Equality, for example, that takes care of the matters pertaining to the Quilombolan communities. And President said that the best thing for us to do is to be the future president here. That is going to take up the seat in January. This is nevertheless somewhat a slow process to guarantee constitutional rights for Quilombolan communities, and in order to preserve the environment. This is also a matter of discussing food health and food security and access thereto. And that's where we mobilize, and we join forces with other movements as well to create a ministry as previously existed, one to fight hunger and food scarcity, to ensure food security and safety, and to make sure that people that work in the land, that they have the access to the means of production, sustainable, and that they access the food that they produce, and that that we are able to preserve as well these territories, and that the people working thereat are able to access the food. And we know that Brazil produces a lot of food to export, but we need to make sure that some of the people in traditional communities, some of the producers as well, and family companies that produce food, we have to make sure that it ensures as well food security for everybody in Brazil. And so we're mobilizing here in this process of COP to talk about this, that needs to be improved in these communities in order to survive the communities of color, some of the matters pertaining to producing sustainable food within the territories of Brazil as well.
Thank you so much, Vercilene. Actually, I'd like
Muito
to share
muito obrigado.
Hold on, I got the translation mixed up again. No, I'm fine now. So yes, and I think that we should also mention, perhaps this can be a call for a next discussion about that the discussions that were held in Egypt about preserving our food systems. And for the first time, agriculture was put on the forefront, and we know much well what it means for societies around the world. And perhaps this can be counted one of the good things that happened in Egypt. I'm going to actually take Vercilene's urge to talk about dialogue and how important dialogue is, even when it's not facilitated very well, like what was in Egypt, and ask everybody at this moment to start a broader discussion. So I'm going to ask first the panelists, but also the members that are here participating with us from around the world to either reflect or to pose questions. I have made some notes, like we already knew from the news that we have some issues to be discussing and to worry about, like what it means about fossil fuels and the fact that they're not phasing down. In fact, we have people saying that at the moment we have gas coming in very strongly, or even atomic energy. What it means that we have started preparing people that perhaps 1.5 is not achievable anymore. But I think for us as well, it's a good opportunity to reflect about what we're going to be doing for the rest of the year until we meet again in the next COP, especially when it comes to be part of the discussions that Kenneth explained to us about how we're going to be using the money, what the financial system is going to be like, will it reflect what people need? Because from what we know so far, even though there's been promise of money and there is some money being coming in, however, it doesn't trickle down to local communities. And lastly, I want to also ask everybody to to have this discussion about how we as GCAP can protect the civic space, because for many, many years, we thought that the COP was a good opportunity for us to have access, even though we knew that access didn't mean always influence. However, in this case, we didn't even have access. We're talking about the COP happening in the middle of nowhere, where you can arrive only by flying, and there were no places to stay. And even if you had this place to stay, no civil society organization could afford these prices. And of course, what was already mentioned about what it means to be defending human rights in a place like this authoritarian regime. So please, these are the few things I've noted down. I've heard from you all of this discussion, and I would like to open to all of you to reflect on that and to comment, both participants and panelists, and you can raise your hand or you can open your microphone, and Johannes and I will try to coordinate. So we do have one question. One question is, what can be done now? Is it not enough to wait until the next COP to continue negotiations on how to finance the loss and damage fund? What can be done in the meantime? Yes, that is perfect. And I would like to hear from everybody if they want to contribute on this. Please, everybody, let's join the dialogue. Kenneth, can I ask you to go first?
Yes. So now that the text, we have the text, it will take at least 2 years for implementation. And so let's get that in mind. Now we have the text, so it will take 2 years for us to really get the money. What GCAP supposed to do now is that we need to have maybe a committee who is following agriculture, who is following finance, who is following loss and damage. So if we have all the thematic, then we can then report to the bigger house, and then we'll have a strategic, because we are looking at justice. And so basically that is how we need to now go and into it. How do we monitor the money as they promise? Are they going to give to us from the ADF or what? Because sometimes they give money and they tell you that it's a climate money, which is not. So we want to get clear, understand which is the climate money, which is the thing that is going for aid. And so basically that's what we need to also ask for aid, not grant. What do you call it? Where tell us, because community have suffered a lot. Basically, that is what I would. So thank you.
Thank you, Kenneth. And also I got some information from Kenneth a bit earlier that yes, we The United Arab Emirates are confirmed for COP28. It's going to happen a bit later in December, which means that then we're going to be moving back to Europe, and this time there's interest to focus on Eastern Europe. Bulgaria and the Czech Republic have signaled their interest. And then we have COP30, where already President-elect Lula has mentioned that he would like to hold it in the Amazon, actually. So, Pradeep, I see your hand. Welcome to the discussion. Please come in and join us.
Thanks, Constantinos. It's been really heartening to hear from colleagues who attended the COP27. I knew also, I have been following it. I heard from one of the speakers that the corporate is taking a lot of interest, a lot of attendance of the corporate in the COP27. We saw it last time also. The question is, what are they doing there? Are they trying to influence the governments to have a favorable policy for alternative energy, which is good in a way, but I'm apprehensive that the whole Paris climate deal is probably being hijacked. Correct me, that's a question. That's my impression. I have not followed it very properly. Is it being hijacked by corporate lobby to just transform the energy system to fossil fuel to alternative energy? Paris climate is not only that. So is it something they are working toward that end of the day? If we have that situation in 30 years, 40 years down the line, that all the energy system is transformed, that's also difficult. But Paris climate is not about only the transformation from a traditional energy system to new energy system. Yeah.
Thank you, Pradeep. I'm wondering if Jose is still here, because Jose actually mentioned about the degradation of what was agreed in Paris. Jose, are you still here?
I'm still here. Sorry, but I didn't quite get what you said. Can you repeat it, please?
Yes, so Pradeep was talking. Yeah, Pradeep, go ahead.
Quickly, are the corporate trying to hijack the whole Paris climate deal and present it as a deal for transformation from the traditional energy system based on fossil fuel to clean energy system? And they are demanding a favorable policy from the national governments to do that.
That's part of it. It's the transition. Let's not kid ourselves. The transition from fossil fuels to clean energy is a big part of the climate of the Paris Agreement, because the whole mitigation, the whole 1.5, keeping things below 1.5, needs a massive, but a really massive investment in transition. And that's a big issue. The other question is if the transition is going to be made in a way that it perpetuates the models that we use today. Instead of having a big oil company, you have a big solar company that produces some kind of clean energy, but still controls the market, and by this way has hand over the control over the population, and it can jack up prices, and it can still do all the things that we see this day. There is what the civil society has been asking for the in all these COPs is that we not only think about how we produce energy, but about how the benefits from this energy and the benefits from development are spread around the communities and the different countries and within the countries. But there is clearly some sort of hijacking of the Paris Agreement, and especially of the monetary aspects, because if the world needs, according to the climate, the Paris Agreement, the world needs to invest in not only in mitigation but also in adaptation. And loss and damage was out of the Paris Agreement, but it's the first pillar of this. But what you have is most of the international funds have been invested in mitigation, particularly in the production of renewable energy. Because it's the easiest way for you to have a return on your money, basically. Because if you have a wind power station built somewhere, it will produce energy, it will sell energy, it will have money, and there's the way that you can go around this. But for developing countries, particularly for least developed and for the SIDS, for the small island developing nations, there isn't all that interest in this kind of projects, because you cannot scale it up, you cannot earn a lot of money. So what you have is that most investment will go for emerging countries and for replacing old energy with new energy. It's somehow of a missed opportunity, and that's what we are fighting for. Is that why not do decentralized energy? Why not produce energy at the level of the community that is consumed at the level of the community? Why not invest in not only in producing energy but also in saving energy? How can the other part of mitigation, which is the carbon capture, how can it be used for benefit of the population? Because if I live in a small village in the middle of, I don't know, like Santo Tomé and Príncipe, the only way that I can make money with the forest and feed my kids and get them to school is if I cut the trees and sell the wood, or if I transform the wood into coal. If you want to conserve that tree, how can this benefit of the tree, the living tree, actually reach me and my family and not get lost somewhere in the ecosystem services consultant network that exists now? So these are a lot of work that we still need to do, and a lot of fights that we need to have in the coming years.
A lot, from what I understand. And dear friends, dear colleagues, this is a chance for everybody to speak, but I also want to remind that we still have some of the panelists here. Caroline is still here, so whenever you want to jump in, do that. I see also Monica and some other friends from around the world. And we just got also joined by Paul, our GCAP Global Co-Chair, which I think is asking to speak. And after that, I'm going to ask my friend Vitaly from Russia as well to comment. Paul, I see we do have some noise coming from your sound. I think you're driving.
Yeah.
It's not easy to hear you.
I'm not able to put out that. Let me see if I can put out that noise. Just give me.
Put it out, and we're going to get back to you in a few moments. So what I want to mention is that we also have what we call the risk of unexpected risk. Like, for example, a big discussion is the energy crisis. Paul, can I ask you to turn off your mic for a while until you fix this? Thank you. So we've been hearing all the discussions about Ukraine and what it means as an energy crisis, and it would be great actually to hear from Vitaly, who is our GCAP Russia coordinator, who's actually Ukrainian, and he's joining us from Ukraine today. So Vitaly, are you here?
Yes, thank you, Constantinos. I'm here. I'm formally with GCAP Russia, but I've taken a somewhat low-profile role because I'm a citizen of Ukraine, actually. And until recently, I was hoping for a peace between our two countries, but unfortunately, it didn't materialize, as you can tell. Actually, the war in Ukraine, which was started by the Russian Federation on February 24th, has inflicted 36 billion euros environmental damage to Ukraine. And it has affected some 30% of Ukraine's protected natural areas, covering 3 million acres that have been bombed, polluted, burned, or hit by military maneuvers by the Russian troops. And as we might be talking about 1.5 degrees Celsius target figure, we should not forget that the damage to the environment, which is being produced by the senseless and barbaric war, is tremendous. And just one incident, for example, shelling of the Zaporizhzhia atomic plant and the incidental explosion of that nuclear plant could bring havoc to the environment, not only in Europe, but the world over. So I think our efforts, we should be very pragmatic. We should really focus and push to do everything possible to avoid a nuclear disaster in Ukraine. This is something that might be, not so much in our minds at the forefront of our concerns, but a nuclear disaster from the war in Ukraine could completely destroy all our plans for environmental protection and achievement of any sort of global target. So this is something that I wanted to also mention, and for us to think about this.
Yes, and it's very heavy, but you're right. We need to start these discussions, and we need to understand what it means for everybody, all these risks and threats that we are causing ourselves. Let me just say that I'm based in Greece, and people in Greece are still seeing the consequences through health issues like cancer about the accident of Chernobyl 35 years ago. So I would like to pass to Paul, and then I see Ingo and Arjun raising their hands, and we also have a question from Sebastian. Dear friends, this is a great discussion. Let's continue. Paul, are you here?
Thank you very much, Constantine. I think it's a great conversation. Some parts I had missed. But I want to just bring in the concern. Vercilene must have raised it, I'm sure, and Jose has just reflected some of them. From the perspective of the communities discriminated on work and dissent, who have been, for generations, have been put out from access to resources and put out from any proposition of accessing the commons in their respective areas in their countries, are now asked to pay for the common future of everybody, right? And then our minimum resources that are needed for a well-being, for education, and all that, they are not at all a consideration. I think some of these inner conflicts really exist. And I think I see that COP has not sufficiently has these voices, so that when we are talking about a common future, it also involves those communities who intergenerationally and who for a long period have been excluded by the very people who are now asking for a common future. And these have not been sufficiently settled in the country, leave alone region, but in the country. And we are the people, especially if you talk to some of the communities from Roma, Gypsy, Sinti in Europe, they talk about a very clear environmental racism that is taking place. So I think some of these issues we need to better articulate, and then also an appeal to the wider group in terms of how do we bring these concerns into the conversations that we are having, so that we really mean a common future, and not only the elite among the commons and elite among our own people who have everything for today, and therefore they are able to talk about 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. But I don't think the communities who have been excluded, their plight is not any time a discussion in these conversations. So I think that is something which we'd like to put it out on the table. I'm sure it is there, but then how do we bring these concerns in a more pragmatic manner so that we can move together? Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And you mentioned environmental racism, which is something that we need to put down in our discussions happening from now on until next year. And I'm going to actually let Ingo a bit later tell us about some of the plans we have, because we are already organized about mobilizing quite big through GCAP for next year's United Nations General Assembly. around what exactly we're talking about, our common future and the halfway point of the SDGs. I think that our June is after that, but also, dear friends, also take a look at the question from Sebastian, and I think he's addressing it to those that were participating in the negotiations or the mobilization. So what are some of the proposals you wanted to put forward but could not due to site constraints? What are your priorities which not get enough attention? And now I'm giving the floor to Arjun. Arjun, good afternoon.
Okay, thank you, Constantino, for giving floor to me.
Arjun, really quickly, please introduce yourself, and let me also say that our previous speaker, Paul Divakar, is also our global co-chair at the GCAP. Thank you, Paul, for your introduction. Arjun, your turn.
Okay, thank you, Constantino, and thank you for organizing this the discuss on the post COP27. Like, you know, there are a couple of good news for like country like Nepal. At least the rich country, they agreed for the loss and damage. The question is like, you know, how it will be implemented. You know, their issue already, like, you know, the countries, developed countries, they agreed like $100 million, you know, not they're committed money, not, you know, not finance to the developing country like Nepal or many least developed countries. So the question is how they will implement it. So this is a big issue for us now, as Nepal also very, you know, vulnerable for the climate because of the climate change, because the Himalaya is melting, and every year we are getting trouble of different types of disasters. So is there any mechanism to, you know, to check the implementation pattern? So how they will implement, and like who will you know, like, you know, monitor monitoring of the implementation? So that is the big issue for now, because already this is the COP27, so many issues already, many commitment and many issues, but as a, you know, civil society activists, there are lack of implementations. So I don't know how it will go in future. So, and the second is, you know, the capacity building of the young peoples and the capacity building of the like, you know, communities living in, you know, in the, like, you know, Himalayas region. So it's they don't understand what is the climate change. So the issue is the climate change, not in the climate change, the climate justice. So as a, you know, developing country, we want now justice. So the question of the justice. So I hope the COP27 is, you know, brought a lot of new issues. So hopefully, as a civil society, we need to monitor their commitment. It will be really implemented in the future. So that is my you know, the brief views. Thank you.
Thank you, Arjun. And it's actually a great important question, what you're asking, how we're going to be doing all this together, because it's not always easy for civil society. Let me say that it was a big effort this year from GCAP as well to mobilize young activists, which is not easy to bring them in Egypt with all the constraints that we mentioned. But I think that before the end of this discussion, we're also going to be hearing about a few plans that we have for next year. I see that Aristide had raised his hand just before. Aristide, I hope that you are still here. And let me also, can you hear me? Or am I still having bad connection?
You're fine. We can hear you well.
Okay. By the way, dear friends, I know this is a great discussion and we don't want to stop it. However, I'm going to have to step out because I'm due to another meeting. I'm going to ask Johannes to continue after me handling the discussion. So it was great seeing you all. I'm going to be listening in, but not be the modified. Thank you so much, and let's continue very soon. Aristide, it's your turn. Are you still here with us? Okay.
Thank you, Constantinos.
Thank you so much.
I know you have to run into another meeting and you'll be listening in. I think we can take one more round of questions and then have kind of everyone who wishes to have a conclusive statement. And also, I saw Ingo, the director of GCAP, had his hand up. So Aristide, you can also ask a question. And if not, Ingo, I would like you, if you want to intervene, please take the floor. I think, Ingo, the floor is yours, and then Aristide, maybe if you're back, you can then add.
Okay. Good. So I wanted to ask, actually, I'm sorry, I'm a bit sick, but I hope you can understand me. So I'm Ingo Ritz, the director of the Global Secretariat. So I was at the COP in Glasgow last year, and I didn't go this year, but it's very good to hear from the people who have been there. That gives a different impression than the media or emails. So of course, the loss and damage is a big success for climate justice. And as others have said, I think we really need to make sure that this is not money going somewhere to governments, but really to the most affected people and areas. So that's what Fridays for Future call MAPA. And I think that's also the core of the GCAP work, and that also we decided as a Global Council in New York that we focus on this particular work to include the most affected people and areas into the process, like, for example, what Paul and Vercilene described. But I wanted to ask another point to the people. There's so much frustration that there's no progress on fossil fuel, or other points on mitigation. Even it's a bit crazy. It's not possible to say something about renewable energy. So there's so much frustration that there's a lot of discussion now in the media whether the COPs really make sense anymore. So I think it's important to have this multilateral mechanism, but it would be good to hear also from people who have been at the COP. But maybe it's also important to not only rely on the COPs. I mean, we had this discussion after Copenhagen already, whether to go to the COPs at all. Probably it's needed to participate, but yeah, we have seen from Fridays for Future or the youth movement that other pressure is needed, definitely. So, but I would like to hear from the people who have been at the COP, where you really see the usefulness of the COP or not. I mean, Constantinos asked about next year's plans. Maybe as I'm speaking, I'm just adding this. So the SDG midway will be next year, so officially end of June will be the 7.5 years until 2030. And there will be the SDG summit in September. So we are planning the People's Assembly at the SDG summit probably before the SDG summit, and we plan also to do the monitoring, not only in the VNR countries, but probably even beyond, for this midway, and to mobilize, of course. So also we are planning to have a GCAP Global Assembly in New York and in September. Those are just some key points, but we are working on these plans and also with you in the regions, and we are planning to have a global call also on these plans for 2023 at the beginning of 2023. So a similar call like this one, inviting all national coalitions and constituency groups. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingo. I see Kenneth has already his hand up, but if Caroline from Nigeria is still here, I would also invite her to speak again as one of the panelists to reflect on the questions Ingo has made. And also I see Aristide who's still here. So if we can, Kenneth, Caroline, and then Aristide with more reflections and questions. Please go ahead.
So COP is very important. It's a place that they take decisions where all the world leaders meet. So it's very important. What we need to do is that we need to, first of all, meet as GCAP, have our position, what we are calling for, because if we are looking at renewable, a lot of people will lose their work, which is how do we find a gap? How do we create a good job for them, sustainable one for them? So basically, that is what we need to look at as coalition. So basically, that is what, if I could answer Ingo, but I'll come back again. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenneth, for your concise and direct answer. I see also that Jose, who was one of the panelists, has his hand up. I think because Aristide has a new question, maybe let's go to Jose first and then to Aristide with a new question.
Hi. Just to, let me turn on the camera also. Regarding, we must understand the limits of the COP, of the COP functioning, and what we can achieve in COP and what we cannot achieve in COP. For instance, if you have a minority within a country that has no representation politically, or whose needs are not heard within the country, it will be extremely difficult to have that problem addressed at the level of a COP. Because even countries, smaller countries, I'm from Portugal, so Portugal is a small fish in the big ocean. But I was born in Cape Verde, which is even smaller. Countries of this size have a lot of problems being heard as a country in these type of events. So a small minority within a small country will have even bigger problems having their problems solved at this level. About the question that Sebastian asked about if there was anything that we wanted to present that we couldn't. It's not exactly that. That's the biggest problem. The biggest problem is that when a representative from the civil society comes to a negotiation or wants to speak with some politician, and it has 5,000 people outside in a demonstration, that gives you a certain amount of legitimacy that you cannot have if you are all alone. And basically, what happens in this COP is that since you have had no demonstrations outside of the COP, you had no way of letting the delegations know what you were representing, basically. So that's one of the things that having a COP in Egypt or in Dubai will be the same thing. Also, there's the whole problem with the costs and how can I get someone from a village in Nicaragua to come to a COP in Dubai, and it will cost more money that probably this whole family will make in a couple of years. So it's not viable to do things that way. Last thing, the importance of the COPs. I think the model is a bit spent. It doesn't have the same vibrancy that you once had. But I can give you an example from Portugal. It's the only time of the year when I can get some major newspaper or major television network to have someone speaking for 10 seconds, even 10 seconds, about loss and damage or about the impacts of climate change somewhere in Mozambique or somewhere that it's not in the immediacy of Portugal. So although I think the model can be improved and should be improved, we need these moments to bring attention to the problem. That's just what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Caroline with an intervention, and then the next question comes afterwards.
Okay. Thank you, Johannes. So I would like to respond to the question of Ingo, that yes, COP is what's going, but we really need to strategize as GCAP on what we want to be doing in COP. Because I remember that during the Copenhagen summit, GCAP was very vibrant. And then the last speaker just spoke about mobilization. They are silencing us, and then we are allowing them to silence us. When we go to COP, how do we mobilize? So as GCAP, we should be leading the campaign outside the COP. That is where we present our issues, what we want them to hear, what we want them to talk about for us. Because they cannot be discussing while we are not at the table. You hardly see civil society at the table discussing all these whole issues. And at the end of the day, we come back, whatever they come out with, we accept. So how do we send our messages to them? is through these mobilizations. I remember even also in Durban, there was massive march for our own priorities, what we want the COP to address. So these are the issues. GCAP should be the one leading some of these movements. And I will appreciate if we could go back to some of these things other than just attending the COP and then not having a very huge impact. A lot of organizations are looking up to GCAP, especially on the African continent. Then two, I also wanted to talk about what Kenneth has already said, that GCAP should set up committees to follow up these issues. Of course, moving into Dubai next year, they want to focus on adaptation, because the three pillars that they are focusing on climate change negotiations are mitigation, adaptation, and then loss and damage. So now that they have addressed mitigation and loss and damage, they are going to move straight into adaptation. Whereas the loss and damage funds that has been made available will start implementation in the next 2 years. So who are those that will follow it through to see that it becomes a reality? Then finally, we need to raise awareness on loss and damage, because a lot of people do not know that there is need for compensation on loss and damage. So we need to raise awareness at the local level and then everywhere, so that people will begin to take up these issues. Then we can have a formidable voice pushing our demands. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caroline, for that powerful statement and also call to action. I think you're quite right in everything that you say, that it's about also now planning ahead, being an action-oriented network and keeping up the pressure from civil society and not letting us being excluded. Thank you very much for that powerful statement. And now, Aristide, I know you have been waiting for a long time. Please, the floor is yours.
Bonjour, madame.
Hello. I wanted to talk to you about something pretty quickly. We are in the DRC here. We're aware of everything that happened at the COP27. We heard what you mentioned here. A lot of things have already been said, but there's something that we've kept on repeating. Civil society will not be involved in all these organizations. If we're not involved, then I think this plan will fail. In the DRC, we're not responsible for a lot of emissions, but the population is suffering from a lot of the impacts. I would like to use this opportunity to say that the DRC is in mourning because of climate disasters. We've seen collapses that have killed about 20 people in one of our cities just because the forests are not protected. So when we're talking about a plan, this plan should take into account the people who currently do not have a voice. That means people who are living in extreme poverty. We'll need to listen to them. If you just talk to politicians and talk about politics, it won't have a great impact. I've heard the word impact a number of times, but I think that we're still aiming for, it's going to stay utopia just so long as we don't have a voice, so long as it stays on just a politician level. In that case, we're not going to even move forward. So we would like concrete plans that really take into account people without means, people who are living in extreme poverty. These people must be protected and must make their voices heard at events such as the COP27 and others. And then there are some minority populations here who should have a voice. People sometimes say here, and this is something that I've heard, the COP27 belongs to the powerful people of this world. It belongs to the politicians. It does not belong to the people who are disadvantaged and living in poverty. This is why we need to make our voices heard. We need to make the voices heard from the people who are living in poverty and always left by the wayside. Without that, the impact in the field will be zero. I think we really need to take into account civil society organizations, just such as GCAP. And we need to have a voice at GCAP and at other events through coalitions, through different organizations, so that people are made aware of what we're going through. When we're learning that there's thousands that would be available in terms of funding, but that
Thank you very much for this important reminder. We have only 3 minutes left of this meeting, and we have still one other hand up. Musa Soko, can you please make an intervention that is 1 to 2 minutes? And then I would like to have some closing remarks from either Kenneth or Caroline or anyone else from the panelists who wishes to give a short 1 minute closing remarks. But over to you, Musa Soko, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you so much, Johannes, and thank you for convening this very important reflection meeting. I feel bringing activists and campaigners around the world, to the COP event was indeed an eye-opening opportunity. And the COP27 event actually, is one, that a lot of reflections have been thrown into, especially around the aspects of inclusion and equity, as well as fairness in the climate arena. And so going forward as advocates, especially coming from one of the world's most fragile settings, I believe proceeds or especially outcomes of the event going forward need to be re-echoed, especially on the front lines of advocacy and policy influence. Because we have discussed so much, the content of the event has been very, very much rich. But then if we fail to do something as advocates and as activists, we will find it very difficult to realizing the very intent of the event. And then we'll keep waiting for the next COP event to come. And so it's very much important that we take deliberate steps going forward as advocates and as campaigners for GCAP. So by the time we meet in New York, possibly during the General Assembly, we can be able to also count some of those gains we've made so far.
Thank you so much, Musa Soko from Sierra Leone, we should add. Thank you so much for your valuable perspective. And because the time is also running out, I want to hand over the floor for some final kind of conclusive remarks. Kenneth has said he is able to give some remarks, and we will immediately finish after that if no one else from the speakers wants to add something. But let me then also just thank all the interpreters for your hard work. Sometimes low audio makes it even more difficult, but you do an excellent job. Thank you very much, Hector, Surja. Thank you very much, Elvira. And Amadine, thank you so much for all the work. And Mariela, as well as Nuno, thank you so much for the interpretation. And I hand over for closing remarks to Kenneth now, after which we will close the call. Thank you. Kenneth, the floor is yours. He has just dropped off, I think. Anyone else would like to have a quick summary, a 1-minute summary or outlook way forward? If not, I can also do that, but I don't want to take the floor if one of the others is able to do that. Right, then, yeah, I just want to thank you all for attending. And we have heard a lot of, let's say, promising characteristics, I would call it, from the COP in terms of process, that there is civil society present, but also they are excluded largely and not adequately represented. On the other hand, we also have, for example, now the fund, the loss and damage fund that is being established, but the financing, who finances it, and specifically also what that means practically for many nations in the global south is uncertain. So these, I think, are questions which we need to discuss further. We need to mobilize and organize at civil society to have a stronger and focused voice at the next COP, but also not only at the COPs, but also in between, keep up the pressure from civil society. We will follow up with an email inviting you all to GCAP's Climate Justice Working Group, which is a group that focuses specifically on climate justice and the movements or movement building that happens not only towards the COPs, but also the other international negotiations and events that take place. And with that, I would like to thank you all for coming. Thank again the interpreters, and wish you all a very good day and evening. Until next time. Thank you very much. Take care all.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.